The evening was calm, the kind of evening where the air felt soft and safe. The street was quiet except for the sound of children laughing in their backyards and neighbors sitting on their porches after a long day. The orange glow of the sunset touched every rooftop, and for a moment the world looked peaceful. But peace in that neighborhood never lasted long, not with Karen around. Karen was the HOA president, and she was feared by everyone. She had the power to fine people for the smallest things. Flowers that grew too tall, fences that weren't painted the approved color, even a child's bicycle left near a porch. Her voice carried through the street like a whip, sharp and cruel, and no one dared talk back to her. On that evening, she marched down the road with her usual scowl, her heels clicking loudly against the pavement. Her eyes were fixed on the small cabin at the end of the street, and in her hand she clutched a folder stuffed with papers. She walked like she was marching into battle. Neighbors leaned forward on their porches, whispering to one another, "She's going to the cabin. She's going after him." Children were pulled inside quickly, doors creaked shut, and curtains moved as people hid themselves but kept their eyes on the scene. The man she was heading toward sat calmly on his porch. He wasn't like the other neighbors. He didn't seem afraid of Karen. He never bowed his head when she passed, never apologized for things she called violations. He kept to himself, lived quietly, and watched everything with calm eyes that gave nothing away. That was enough to make Karen furious. She thrived on fear, and when someone didn't show it, she saw it as a direct challenge. That evening, she had decided to crush him. Karen stormed up to the porch, her voice loud and sharp. "You," she barked, pointing a finger at the man. "You are breaking the rules of this community. Your porch light is not approved. Your mailbox is not the right style, and don't think I haven't noticed that you park your car at an angle that doesn't match the guidelines." She flipped open her folder and waved the papers in his face. "I have it all written down. You've ignored warnings, and I will not tolerate it any longer. You are a problem in this neighborhood, and I will handle you like I handle everyone else who dares to break my rules." The man looked at her steadily, not flinching, not even shifting in his chair. He took a slow sip from the cup in his hand before setting it down on the armrest. The neighbors who were secretly watching expected him to argue, to shout back or defend himself. But he didn't. He simply asked, in a voice calm and even, "What rules are you talking about?" His words were simple, but they made Karen's face turn red. She hated being questioned. Karen sneered, waving her papers again. "Don't play dumb with me. I am the HOA president. My word is the law here. If I say your porch is a violation, it is a violation. If I say you don't belong here, then you don't belong here. That's how it works. Everyone here knows it." She turned and looked at the windows where neighbors hid behind curtains. "Isn't that right?" she shouted, but no one answered. The silence of the neighborhood made her angrier. She turned back to the man. "You think you're different? You think you can ignore me? No one ignores me." Still, the man stayed calm. His eyes didn't waver, his voice didn't rise. "This is my home," he said softly. "You don't decide that. You don't control me." His calm tone was more powerful than shouting could have been. The neighbors, hidden and silent, felt a shiver run through them. No one had ever spoken to Karen like that before. Karen's lips curled into a smirk. "We'll see about that," she snapped. She pulled out her phone and held it up so everyone could see. "You're trespassing on HOA-controlled property, and you're refusing to comply with rules. That makes you dangerous. So I'm calling the police." Her voice rose as she dialed the number, making sure the neighbors heard every word. "Yes, officer," she said loudly into the phone. "There's a man here causing trouble. He's refusing to follow community rules. He's a threat, and I need him removed immediately." She locked eyes with the man as she spoke, her smile full of arrogance. "Let's see how calm you are when they arrive." The neighbors gasped quietly behind their curtains. This was Karen's favorite weapon, using the police to intimidate. She had done it before, over tiny arguments, over made-up complaints. People had always backed down before the sirens arrived. But this time felt different. The man didn't panic. He didn't beg her to hang up. He didn't even frown. He sat there, still and quiet, his calm eyes fixed on her like he already knew how this would end. Karen ended the call and slipped her phone into her pocket, her smirk widening. "They are on their way," she said triumphantly. "Enjoy your last few minutes here. You'll be out before the night is over." She turned to leave, her heels clicking on the porch steps, her voice echoing down the street. "And when you're gone, everyone here will remember what happens when you defy me." The neighbors whispered among themselves, their voices trembling. She called the cops on him. "He'll be gone for sure." But others shook their heads slowly. "Did you see his face? He wasn't scared. Not even a little." They didn't know why, but something about his silence unsettled them. It was as if he held a secret, one that Karen didn't know. Inside his house, the man stood and placed his cup on the counter. He walked to a drawer and opened it quietly, pulling something out and sliding it into his jacket pocket. His movements were steady, deliberate. He wasn't rushing, he wasn't nervous. He glanced once at the glowing street outside, where neighbors peeked nervously and Karen strutted back toward her house with victory written on her face. Then he closed the drawer and returned to his chair on the porch. The sirens could be heard faintly in the distance, growing louder, drawing closer. The neighbors' whispers grew frantic. Some said prayers under their breath, others shook their heads in resignation. Karen stood in her front yard with her arms crossed, grinning like a queen awaiting her coronation. The man leaned back in his chair, his hands folded, his calm eyes on the flashing lights that rounded the corner. Nobody in that neighborhood knew who he really was, but they were about to find out. The sirens grew louder until the flashing lights turned onto the street, washing the quiet homes in red and blue. Neighbors pressed closer to their windows, some holding their breath, others clutching their children's shoulders. The police car rolled to a stop right in front of the cabin. Karen was already in the middle of the street, waving her arms like a performer on stage, her voice shrill with fake distress. "Over here, officers. Thank God you came," she cried, pointing dramatically at the man sitting calmly on his porch. "That's him. He's trespassing, refusing to follow rules, threatening me and this entire neighborhood. You need to arrest him immediately before he causes more trouble." She made sure her voice was loud enough for every neighbor to hear, her smile triumphant as though the victory was already hers. The officers stepped out of their car, glancing first at Karen and then at the man. The man didn't move. He sat quietly in his chair, his hands folded on his lap, his expression calm, almost bored. The neighbors couldn't believe it. Anyone else would have been scrambling to defend themselves, shouting that Karen was lying, begging the police not to take them away. But he just watched, his eyes steady as the officers approached. Karen hurried to one of the officers, grabbing his arm as she spoke rapidly. "You don't know what it's been like living near him. He refuses every rule, he mocks my authority, and now he's threatening the safety of this entire community. You need to drag him out of here before he hurts someone." The officer raised an eyebrow, pulling his arm free from her grip. Calm down," he said firmly. "We'll talk to him directly." Karen huffed but stepped aside, arms crossed tightly, her smirk never leaving her face. She whispered loudly to the neighbors behind her, "Watch this. He'll be gone in minutes. No one escapes the law." The man finally rose from his chair, his movements slow and deliberate. He stepped off the porch and walked toward the officers with a quiet authority that made even the neighbors lean closer, curious. He didn't shuffle nervously or look away. His presence was steady, commanding in a way none of them had expected. The officer spoke first. "Sir, we've been called here because of complaints made against you. This woman claims you're violating HOA regulations, refusing orders, and creating disturbances. Do you have anything to say before we proceed?" The crowd waited, their hearts racing. This was the moment when most people would plead their innocence or argue with Karen's accusations. But the man did neither. Instead, he reached slowly into his jacket. Gasps rippled through the crowd, neighbors pressing against the glass of their windows, some even ducking down in fear of what he might pull out. Karen's smirk widened, thinking she finally had him. "See?" she shrieked. He's reaching for something. Dangerous. Arrest him now. But when the man pulled his hand out, it wasn't a weapon. It was a leather badge case. He flipped it open with calm precision, holding it up for the officers to see. The gold shield gleamed under the flashing lights. The officers froze, then straightened instantly, their posture snapping into respect. One of them saluted sharply. "Detective," he said, his tone completely changed. The crowd erupted into whispers, the word flying from porch to porch, window to window. "Detective? He's a cop. He's been one of them all along." No wonder he wasn't afraid of Karen. Karen's face went pale. She stumbled forward, her mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. What? No. No. This is impossible. He can't be one of you. He's lying. He forged that. Arrest him anyway, she screamed, her voice cracking. But the officers ignored her. Their eyes were on the man, waiting for his command. He closed the badge case and slid it back into his jacket with the same calm precision, then spoke in a low, steady voice. "Officers, this woman has made a false report. She has harassed this neighborhood for years, abusing her position to control and intimidate. I have evidence to prove it." The neighbors gasped again, pressing closer to the windows, their fear slowly transforming into hope. The man reached into the leather folder on his porch table and handed the officers a thick stack of documents. Photographs, violation letters, timestamps, and even recordings were tucked neatly inside. The officer flipped through them, his expression hardening as he read. "Everything's here," the man continued, his calm voice carrying easily in the tense silence. "She's not protecting the community. She's weaponizing her authority. And now she's wasting police resources with false claims. That's a crime." Karen shrieked, trying to grab the papers out of the officer's hands. "Lies. He's twisting everything. I am the president here. I make the rules. You're supposed to listen to me." Her voice cracked again, rising higher and higher as the officers stepped away from her. One of them shook his head. The law does not work like that. You don't get to call 911 for personal power games. Filing false reports is serious, and this evidence doesn't look good for you." The neighbors' whispers grew louder, some even daring to step out onto their porches now. "She called 911 on him, and here's the police himself. She's finished this time. He has proof, real proof." Karen turned to the crowd, her eyes wild, her hands trembling. "Don't listen to him. He's tricking you. You need me. Without me, this street will collapse. You'll regret this." But her words didn't carry the weight they once did. The neighbors didn't lower their eyes anymore. They stared back at her coldly, some even smirking, others whispering, "No more fear." The man didn't raise his voice, didn't even move closer. He simply stood tall under the flashing lights, his badge shining briefly as the car's headlights caught it. "Enough," he said quietly. "This ends tonight." And for the first time, Karen's smirk vanished completely. The officers moved toward her, not to protect her, but to restrain her. Karen stumbled back, her shrill voice breaking into a scream. "No! You can't do this. You don't understand. I'm in charge here." But the neighbors knew the truth now. She wasn't in charge anymore. The calm man she had mocked and threatened was the one holding all the power. And as the officers placed their hands on her shoulders, guiding her away from the center of the street, the neighbors began to whisper the words that had been buried for years: "We're free." The flashing lights slowly faded as the patrol car remained parked in the street, but the real electricity was in the air between the neighbors. One by one, porch lights flicked on, curtains were pushed aside, and doors opened. Families who had always stayed quiet were stepping outside now, their eyes wide, their voices buzzing with excitement and disbelief. Children whispered to their parents, "He's a cop? He's really a cop?" And the parents nodded, some still too stunned to answer properly. 4 years, they had lived in fear of Karen's constant threats, her letters, her fines, her shouts. But tonight, for the first time, they saw her stumble. Tonight, they saw her pale face when the badge came out. Karen was still in the middle of the street, her body stiff, her mouth moving but her words shaky and hollow. "You don't know what he's really like," she screamed at the neighbors, her voice cracking. "He's dangerous. He's tricking all of you. Without me, this neighborhood will fall apart. I kept you safe. I kept order." But the words that once made people bow their heads and retreat into their homes no longer had power. Now they rang desperate, empty, like someone begging not to be forgotten. The man stood quietly on his porch, arms folded, watching everything with those same calm eyes. He didn't gloat, didn't boast. He didn't need to. The silence of his presence was heavier than any of Karen's shouts. The officers remained near him, flipping through his documents, nodding to each other, their faces serious. Every piece of paper, every photograph, every recorded violation added more weight to the truth. And the truth was clear. Karen wasn't a protector. She was a bully. A neighbor finally stepped forward. It was an older man with a cane, his voice trembling but steady. "She fined me for my shutters," he said loudly, so everyone could hear. 3 times. 3 times, and I repainted them. And still she said it wasn't enough. She bled me dry. His words cut through the night, and whispers turned into murmurs. Another woman stepped forward, clutching her child's hand. "She tore down my roses. My little girl planted them with me, and Karen ripped them out, said they were the wrong kind. My daughter cried for days." Her voice shook with anger, and the crowd gasped, murmuring louder now. Karen spun on them, her face red. "You all agreed to the rules. You signed the contracts. Don't you dare blame me for your mistakes." But her voice cracked again, drowned out by another man's voice, this one younger, stronger. "You fined me for hanging my laundry to dry. You called it an eyesore. That was the day I almost lost my job because I couldn't afford your penalty." The crowd began to stir, louder, more confident. One by one, the neighbors spoke up, their voices layering on top of each other until it became a wave of stories. Each one was proof of Karen's cruelty, each one tearing another piece of her power away. The officers glanced at each other, then at the man, who gave a single nod. He stepped forward, his calm voice cutting through the noise, drawing silence without effort. "You see," he said, his words steady. "Fear kept you quiet. Fear made you think you were alone. But you were never alone. She made you believe she had power because you let her speak louder than you. But fear is always loud before it dies." His eyes swept across the crowd, and the neighbors held his gaze, some nodding, some tearing up, all realizing the truth in his words. Karen stomped her foot, her hands shaking as she shouted, "Don't listen to him. He's lying. He's twisting everything. You'll regret this, all of you." But even as she spoke, the neighbors began to chant, softly at first, then louder, "No more fear. No more fear. No more fear." The chant rolled down the street, echoing off the houses, growing stronger with every voice that joined. Karen shouted louder, screaming at them to stop, but her words were swallowed by the chant. For the first time, she wasn't the loudest voice on the street. For the first time, she was drowned out. The man stood tall, his calm eyes steady on Karen. "You thought you could use fear forever," he said softly, his voice carrying over the chants. "But fear has no power where truth stands. And tonight, the truth is here." Karen's face twisted, her eyes wild, but the officers stepped closer, their patience gone. One of them said firmly, "You need to stop. Now." She stumbled back, her hands raised, her words reduced to shrill muttering no one wanted to hear. The neighbors didn't return to their homes that night. They stayed outside, talking, sharing stories, their voices growing freer as each minute passed. They no longer whispered. They spoke loudly, proudly, as though the air itself had been cleared of something heavy. And as Karen retreated slowly toward her house, her shoulders hunched, her jacket sagging, they didn't follow her with fear. They followed her with cold, hard stares. She was no longer untouchable. She was no longer in control. The man returned to his porch, his badge glinting faintly under the porch light. His wife joined him, their children peeking from the window, their eyes wide but hopeful. He sat back in his chair, his voice low, steady, almost like a promise. "This is only the beginning," he said. "Her voice is fading. And soon, it will be gone forever." The neighbors heard him, and they believed him. The chant rose again, not fearful, but proud, filling the street with a sound that would never again be silenced. No more fear. No more fear. No more fear. The courthouse was filled before the sun even reached its peak. Neighbors who had once been too afraid to speak now lined the benches shoulder to shoulder, their whispers echoing through the high-ceilinged chamber. Reporters gathered in the back, cameras flashing, pens scratching across paper, hungry to capture the downfall of the woman who had ruled the valley with fear. The air was thick with tension, but beneath it there was something else too, hope, fragile but growing stronger with each passing hour. At the front of the room, the man sat with his wife beside him, the leather folder resting on the table. His eyes were calm as always, steady and unreadable, as if nothing here could shake him. Karen stormed into the room like a queen walking into her throne hall. She wore her red jacket, her hair pulled back tight, her mouth curved in a forced smile that didn't touch her eyes. She carried another thick folder of papers, slamming them onto her table with a sharp crack. Her lawyer trailed behind her, his face pale, his steps hesitant. Karen glanced around at the neighbors, her lips curling as though daring them to look away. But they didn't. For the first time in years, no one dropped their gaze. Their eyes followed her coldly as she took her seat, and though she smirked, her fingers twitched nervously against her papers. The judge entered, his gavel striking the desk with authority. The room fell into silence. "This court is now in session," he said, his voice carrying through every corner. "We are here to hear the case brought by the Homeowners Association against this resident, and the counterclaims brought against the HOA president herself." His eyes lingered on Karen for a moment before shifting to the man. "Let us proceed." Karen's lawyer stood first, clearing his throat. His words came quickly, rehearsed but shaky. "Your Honor, my client has evidence that this man has violated multiple HOA regulations. His property is not in compliance, his behavior is disruptive, and his presence is a danger to the order of this community. We submit these inspection reports and violation notices as proof." He handed the papers to the clerk, who brought them to the judge. Karen leaned forward eagerly, her smile tight, her hands trembling slightly as she tried to look confident. The judge flipped through the stack, his brow furrowing deeper with each page. He turned one sideways, holding it up to the light. He tapped another with his gavel, the sharp sound echoing. Finally, he set them down with a heavy sigh. "These reports are riddled with errors," he said firmly. "Dates don't match. The signatures are inconsistent. And these seals," he lifted a page, showing it to the courtroom, "are clearly photocopied. This is not official documentation." Gasps spread through the courtroom like wildfire. Neighbors leaned forward, whispering furiously. "She forged them. She really tried to trick the court. She thinks she's untouchable." Karen leapt to her feet, her voice breaking into a scream. "No! They're real. They have to be real. I ordered those inspections myself." Her lawyer tugged at her sleeve, whispering desperately for her to sit down, but she shook him off. "Don't you dare ignore me. I am the president of the HOA. My word is law." The judge's eyes narrowed, his tone turning cold. Your word is not law in this courtroom. The law is the law. And presenting falsified documents here is a serious offense." His words cut like a blade, and the neighbors erupted again, some clapping, some shouting in disbelief. Karen turned on them, pointing her finger wildly. "You fools! You think you're free without me? You'll drown in chaos. I kept you safe. I gave you order. You'll regret this." But her voice cracked, shrill and panicked, and the neighbors didn't bow their heads this time. They stared back, some shaking their heads, others crossing their arms, their silence heavier than her screams. Then the man rose slowly, carrying the leather folder to the front. He placed it carefully on the judge's desk, opening it with calm precision. Inside was everything: property deeds, photographs of Karen's car blocking his driveway, records of the false fines she had issued, letters she had threatened neighbors with, even recordings of her shouting at families. Each page was organized, stamped, undeniable. The judge studied them for several minutes, his expression grim. Then he looked up, his voice heavy with finality. This evidence is valid. It proves years of harassment, false charges, and abuse of authority by the HOA president. It also confirms the property in question has always belonged legally to this man, free of HOA jurisdiction. The case against him is baseless. The neighbors gasped again, this time with relief, and whispers turned to cheers. Some clapped quietly, others wept openly. Karen staggered back as though the words had struck her physically. No, no, this can't be happening, she whispered, her hands trembling. She tried to gather her papers, but they slipped from her fingers, scattering across the floor like fallen leaves. No one bent to help her. Even her lawyer lowered his eyes, slowly packing up his briefcase as though distancing himself from her collapse. The man didn't gloat. He didn't smile or shout. He only turned back to the neighbors, his calm eyes steady, his voice quiet but clear. Fear ruled you for years. It fined you for your shutters, tore up your gardens, punished your children for playing too loudly. And you believed you were alone. But you weren't. You never were. Tonight, you've seen the truth. Fear is loud, but truth is louder. His words carried through the room, and the neighbors erupted into applause, their voices merging into one chant that shook the courthouse. No more fear. No more lies. No more fear. Karen covered her ears, screaming at them to stop, but her voice was swallowed whole. She tried to shout at the judge, at the officers, at the neighbors, but no one listened. Her reign was ending, and nothing she said could stop it now. The judge struck his gavel sharply. This court will deliver final judgment tomorrow morning, he declared, his voice booming. And it will be final. The neighbors poured out of the courthouse with lanterns glowing even in the daylight, chanting as they went, their joy spilling into the streets. Karen remained slumped in her chair, her red jacket sagging on her shoulders, her papers scattered at her feet, her empire crumbling around her. And the man stepped outside into the sunlight, his family at his side, the crowd surrounding him, their lanterns raised high. He said nothing more, but his calm eyes told them all they needed to know. The end of fear was coming. The courthouse emptied slowly, but the echoes of the chants still clung to the walls like a storm that refused to fade. Outside on the steps, neighbors stood in clusters, their voices alive with energy they had never dared to show before. They talked openly about the years of torment, about the roses Karen ripped up, the shutters she fined, the toys she called violations. For the first time, their words were not whispered behind curtains but shouted in the open air. Children ran between the groups with lanterns still glowing from the night before, holding them high like trophies of freedom. The man stood quietly with his wife at his side, nodding politely as neighbors thanked him again and again. He didn't say much, but his calm eyes carried weight enough for everyone. Karen, however, did not leave the courthouse in silence. She stormed out a side door, her heels clattering angrily on the pavement, her red jacket flapping behind her like a cape that no longer commanded respect. Her lawyer trailed after her, muttering about how the case was unwinnable and that she should stop before she made things worse. She spun on him, her eyes wild, her voice sharp enough to cut. Don't you dare tell me it's over. I built this community. Without me, they're animals. They need rules, they need order, and I'm the only one who can give it to them. The lawyer shook his head, muttered something about criminal charges, and left her standing alone in the parking lot. That night, the neighbors didn't retreat into their homes as they once did. They lit lanterns again, lined them along the street, and gathered together in front yards as if protecting the peace they had just reclaimed. Karen watched from her window, the glow of the lights burning into her eyes. Their laughter and voices felt like knives, reminding her that her control was slipping. She paced her living room like a caged animal, muttering to herself. They think they've won. They think I'm finished. But they're wrong. I'll show them what happens when you betray me. She poured herself another glass of wine, her hand trembling, and spread her remaining papers across the table. Each one was more desperate than the last. False complaints, fabricated fines, wild accusations. She scribbled frantically, her pen digging grooves into the pages. "Tomorrow," she whispered. "Tomorrow I'll strike back. They'll crawl to me again." The next morning she marched into the community hall, her arms full of new documents. The neighbors followed her, not out of obedience but curiosity, determined not to let her pull her tricks in the shadows anymore. She stood at the front, her voice shrill as she slammed the stack of papers down. "This man is dangerous," she screeched, pointing toward the calm figure sitting quietly at the back. "He's manipulated you, tricked you with lies. He is not who he says he is. I have proof that he doesn't belong here, proof that he has been planning against us all from the beginning." Her words rang out, but instead of silence, the room filled with low murmurs of disbelief. The man rose slowly, carrying his leather folder. He did not need to raise his voice. "Show your proof," he said calmly. Karen froze. Her eyes darted between her papers and the faces staring at her. She lifted one sheet and waved it in the air. This shows he's a danger." Her voice cracked as the crowd leaned forward, and the man stepped closer, his eyes steady. "Let them see it," he said. She hesitated, then shoved the paper at the nearest neighbor. Within seconds the lie was obvious. The document had no seal, no date, no signature. The neighbor held it high. "This is fake," he shouted. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Another paper was passed along, then another, each one more clearly fabricated than the last. Laughter began to spread, bitter and mocking. Karen's face turned red, her voice growing desperate. "They are real. They have to be real. Don't you see? Without me, this place will collapse. You'll regret this when everything falls apart." She slammed her hands on the table, but no one flinched this time. Instead, voices rose against her, one after another. "You fined me for my mailbox. You humiliated my daughter. You stole from us all." Their anger filled the hall like thunder. Karen tried to shout over them, but her words were swallowed by the storm. Then the chant began again. "No more fear. No more fear." Louder and louder, until the walls shook. Karen covered her ears, her screams drowned beneath the power of their voices. The man stepped forward once more, his calm presence silencing the chant just enough for his words to be heard. "Fear shouts when it is dying. Lies grow desperate when the truth is near. Tonight you have seen both. This ends now." His words struck harder than any gavel. Karen stumbled back, her papers spilling across the floor, her red jacket slipping from her shoulders. The neighbors no longer looked at her with fear but with pity and contempt. She was no longer a queen, no longer a ruler. She was just a woman, desperate and broken, clinging to the last threads of power that had already been cut. The man returned to his seat, his eyes calm, his folder resting quietly in his hands. Around him, the neighbors straightened their backs, their voices steadier, their eyes brighter. They had tasted freedom, and they would not let it go again. The next morning the courthouse was more crowded than ever before. People from every corner of the valley filled the benches, stood along the walls, and even gathered outside the doors where reporters pointed cameras and shouted questions. Lanterns still hung from porches across town, their flames flickering proudly in daylight as symbols of resistance. The neighbors carried that same fire in their hearts as they came to see what they knew would be the end of Karen's reign. Inside the courtroom, the atmosphere buzzed with energy, whispers colliding like waves. Some spoke of the fake documents she had waved around the night before. Others whispered about her red jacket and how it no longer looked powerful but desperate. And all of them knew today the truth would either stand tall or fall. The man entered quietly, his wife at his side, the leather folder tucked under his arm as always. He moved with the same calm stride, his eyes steady, his posture straight, and his silence commanding more attention than Karen's loudest screams. He took his seat at the front without a word, nodding politely to the neighbors who leaned forward to greet him with soft thanks and hopeful smiles. His calmness gave them strength, as though simply by sitting there, he had already promised victory. Karen arrived moments later, storming through the doors like a storm barely holding itself together. Her red jacket was buttoned too tightly, her hair pulled back harshly, her eyes darting nervously even as she tried to wear a smirk. She slammed another pile of papers onto the table, but the sound wasn't sharp and commanding anymore. It was frantic, desperate, a cry for attention. Her lawyer did not return. She came alone. She looked around the courtroom, waiting for eyes to drop as they always had, but instead she was met with cold stares and whispers of contempt. Some neighbors even shook their heads openly. For the first time in years, she wasn't feared. She was pitied. The judge entered, and the gavel cracked against the desk. Silence fell like a heavy blanket. His eyes swept across the room before resting on Karen. "This court will review the documents presented yesterday by the HOA president," he said firmly. He lifted the pile she had submitted, his brow furrowed deeply. "We have had these examined by state officials, and the results are clear. Every one of these so-called reports is falsified. The dates do not align, the seals are copied, the signatures forged. These are not legitimate records. They are fabrications, created to deceive this court." Gasps spread through the crowd, followed by a ripple of angry voices. She lied again. She tried to trick the court itself. How far will she go? The judge struck his gavel for silence. Karen shot to her feet, her voice breaking as she shouted, "No! They're real. They have to be real. You can't just dismiss them. I worked too hard. I gave too much. Without me, this community is nothing." Her words rang hollow, shrill, like glass breaking. The judge's tone hardened. This is perjury. Presenting false evidence in this courtroom is a crime, and you will face the consequences. The law does not bend for you, and it will not bow to fear." His words echoed, final and heavy, and neighbors gasped before erupting into murmurs again. The man stood slowly, carrying his leather folder to the front with the same calm precision. He handed the judge his carefully kept evidence. Photographs of her car parked illegally, violation letters she had sent with no basis, testimony from neighbors who had suffered under her rules. He even provided audio recordings where her voice could be heard threatening residents, mocking them, promising punishment. The judge listened, the clerk read, and the officers who stood nearby shook their heads grimly as the pile of truth grew higher. Karen's face twisted, her hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly her knuckles turned white. "They are lying," she screamed, pointing at the neighbors who had risen to testify. "You're all liars. You're ungrateful. I gave you order. I gave you rules. Without me, this place will burn." But the neighbors did not sit down. They stood taller, one by one, their voices joining together. A mother said, "You tore my roses out." An old man said, "You fined me until I couldn't eat." A young father said, "You humiliated my children." Each voice stacked on the last until it was no longer testimony. It was a chorus of truth that drowned Karen's shrill protests. The judge raised his hand for silence, but he didn't strike his gavel. He let their voices echo first, then spoke when they faded. "This court has heard enough. The documents you presented are false. The testimonies against you are consistent, and the evidence provided by this man is undeniable. You have abused your position, harassed your neighbors, and attempted to use the law as your personal weapon. Effective immediately, your authority is revoked. The HOA is dissolved. You, are guilty of misconduct and will face criminal investigation." The room erupted. Neighbors leapt to their feet, clapping, cheering, tears flowing freely. The chant began again, thunderous and unshaken. "No more fear. No more lies. No more fear." Karen stumbled back, shaking her head violently, her voice cracking into a scream. "No! You can't do this to me. You need me. You'll regret this." But her words were swallowed by the roar of the crowd. The officers stepped forward, their hands on her arms, and for the first time she struggled not to command but to escape. She twisted, shrieked, begged, but no one listened. She was no longer the queen of the valley. She was a liar stripped bare before everyone. The man turned back to the crowd, his calm voice silencing them gently. "For years, she told you the rules were stronger than you. But rules built on lies collapse. Fear told you to stay quiet. But fear is gone now. Stand together, and no one can rule you with lies again." His words filled the room, steady and certain, and the neighbors cheered louder than before. Lanterns glowed in their hands, raised high in triumph. Karen's red jacket sagged on her shoulders as she was led away, her papers scattered like ash. And when the gavel struck one final time, the sound was not just judgment, it was freedom. The courthouse emptied into the streets like a flood, but the energy did not fade. Lanterns lit up again even under the bright sun, neighbors holding them high as they chanted and laughed together. For the first time in years, they walked freely without looking over their shoulders, without worrying about a fine or a threat waiting in their mailbox. Children ran along the sidewalks, waving little flags and shouting the chant they had heard their parents start in the courtroom. No more fear. No more fear. The valley had found its voice. But inside her house, Karen raged like a storm. She had been dragged out of the courtroom humiliated, her papers scattered like trash, her title stripped in front of everyone. Still, her pride refused to die. She slammed her fists against the walls, tore through drawers, and muttered through clenched teeth. They think they can take it from me. They think they can silence me. They don't understand. I made this place. Without me, they're nothing. She poured another glass of wine, her hands trembling, her eyes bloodshot from anger and exhaustion. She stared out her window at the lanterns glowing across the street, each one a reminder of her crumbling control, and whispered, "I'll take it all back. They'll see." That night, when most of the valley gathered in yards to celebrate, Karen made her move. She stormed into the community hall, dragging a box of papers behind her. Neighbors followed cautiously, determined not to let her act in secret. She climbed onto the small stage at the front, her voice shrill as she spread her documents across the table. "You fools!" she screamed. "You think you're free? You think this man saved you? He's a liar, and I have proof." Her words cracked as she pointed toward the man, who sat calmly at the back, his wife and children beside him. He didn't flinch, didn't move, only watched her with those same steady eyes that made her angrier. She grabbed one paper and waved it high. "This shows he's not who he says he is. This proves he's a danger to us all." She thrust the paper toward the nearest neighbor, but the man took it and held it up. His face twisted with disgust. "This is fake," he said loudly. Gasps spread through the crowd. Another neighbor grabbed a paper from her pile. "This one too, no signatures, no dates." One by one, her supposed proof was passed around and revealed for what it was: forgeries. Karen's face turned red, sweat dripping down her forehead. She slammed both fists on the table. "No! They're real. They have to be. You need me. Without me, you'll collapse into chaos." Her screams grew louder, more desperate, but the neighbors did not shrink back this time. Instead, they rose from their chairs, one by one. Their voices strong. A mother shouted, "You tore down my roses." An old man cried, "You bled me dry with fines." A young woman said, "You called my children animals." Their voices built on each other, louder and louder, until the hall shook with the sound of years of anger finally breaking free. Karen tried to scream over them, but her words were swallowed by the noise. Then the chant began again, louder than before. "No more fear. No more lies. No more fear." The sound rolled through the hall, through the open doors, and out into the valley where the people outside picked it up until it became a roar across the night. Karen covered her ears, her shrill voice breaking as she screamed, "Stop! Stop! You can't do this to me. I am your president. You can't survive without me." But the crowd no longer listened. They had found something stronger than fear: each other. The man finally rose, walking calmly to the front. His presence silenced the chants without a word. He placed his leather folder on the table beside Karen's scattered lies. His voice was soft but clear, carrying to every corner. "Fear is loud when it is dying. Lies scream when truth is near. Tonight, you have seen both. She no longer rules you. You rule yourselves. You are free." His words settled into their hearts like a promise. The neighbors erupted again, clapping and cheering, some with tears streaming down their faces. Lanterns were lifted high, their flames glowing like stars inside the hall. Karen sank to her knees, her red jacket slipping off her shoulders, her papers scattered around her like ashes. She looked around wildly, but no one came to her defense. Not one person lowered their head or stepped forward. Her reign, built on fear and silence, had shattered completely. The people she once controlled now stood taller, their eyes shining with strength. The officers who had followed the crowd stepped forward quietly, waiting for the man's nod. He gave it, calm and steady. They placed a hand on Karen's shoulder, and she didn't fight this time. Her strength was gone. She was escorted out through the crowd, and the neighbors didn't shrink back. They watched with cold, steady eyes as the woman who had ruled them with fear was led away powerless. The man turned back to the crowd. He didn't smile, didn't boast. He only said, "Truth has spoken. Fear is finished." The people cheered louder than ever, their chants echoing into the night. Lanterns glowed brighter, flames rising higher, and for the first time in years, the valley was free of her shadow. That night the valley glowed brighter than ever before. Every porch had a lantern burning, every street corner shimmered with light, and the lake itself looked like it was covered in stars as families set small floating lanterns adrift across the water. The sound of laughter and voices filled the air, but beneath the celebration was a steady drumbeat of anticipation. Tomorrow the court would give its final ruling, and everyone knew what it meant. The end of Karen's power forever. Neighbors who once avoided eye contact now stood together in clusters, sharing food, stories, and memories of the years they had spent under her shadow. Old men recalled the countless fines for things that never mattered. Mothers spoke about how their children were scolded for playing too loudly, and young couples laughed bitterly about letters that had threatened them for hanging laundry on a line. But tonight those stories no longer carried shame. Tonight they were told with pride, because they all knew fear had lost its hold. The man sat quietly on his porch, watching it all. His wife rested beside him, her hand warm in his, their children curled up on the steps, their eyes wide at the glowing sight. Lanterns floated across the lake like a river of fire, and the people chanted softly, "No more fear, no more lies," their voices gentle but steady. His wife looked at him and whispered, "Tomorrow this ends." He nodded, his calm eyes steady on the horizon. "Tomorrow it begins," he answered. "Fear ends, but truth continues." Across the street, behind dark curtains, Karen paced like a ghost in her own home. Her once proud red jacket lay crumpled in a chair, her papers scattered across the floor, her phone buzzing with calls she ignored. She could hear the voices outside, could see the glow of lanterns slipping through the edges of her curtains, and every sound was a knife cutting into what little pride she had left. She whispered to herself over and over, "They need me. They've always needed me. Without me they'll fall apart." But even as she said it, she could not drown out the echo of their chant. It rang in her ears, louder than her own words, "No more fear." She tried to block it out by pacing faster, by pouring another glass of wine, by clutching her last remaining documents, but nothing silenced the truth pressing in from every window. The night stretched long, and for once the valley did not sleep early. Families stayed awake together, their lanterns glowing until the stars faded into the first pale streaks of dawn. When the sun finally rose, the people were already gathering. They walked as families, as neighbors, carrying lanterns even in the morning light, refusing to let their flames die. The courthouse steps filled quickly, reporters swarming, microphones raised, cameras flashing, as the crowd grew larger than anyone had ever seen in the valley. The chant started quietly at first, then grew louder as more voices joined, "No more fear. No more fear." It rolled through the air like thunder, echoing against the hills, carried across the lake. The man arrived quietly, his wife and children at his side, the leather folder still tucked neatly under his arm. The crowd parted for him without being asked, their lanterns raised higher as he passed. Some reached out to shake his hand, others whispered their gratitude, and many simply stared at him with respect. His calm presence steadied them, as though just by walking among them he had already promised the outcome they all prayed for. He did not wave or smile, but his eyes held the same steady calm that had carried them this far. Moments later, Karen arrived. She stepped out of her car in her wrinkled red jacket, her chin lifted high, her mouth twisted into a forced smirk. But the crowd did not scatter or lower their eyes this time. Instead, they stared openly, their voices falling silent for only a moment before turning into murmurs of contempt. Some crossed their arms, others shook their heads, and a few laughed bitterly. The jacket that once symbolized power now looked like nothing more than fabric draped over someone clinging to a crown she had already lost. Karen's smile twitched, faltered, and her eyes darted nervously, but she forced herself to march up the steps anyway, clutching her scattered papers like broken weapons. Inside, the courtroom was packed to bursting. Every bench was filled, the walls lined with standing neighbors, reporters jostling for position at the back. The judge entered, and silence fell instantly as his gavel struck. "This court reconvenes for final judgment," he declared, his voice heavy and stern. "Before the ruling is delivered, each side may make one final statement." Karen leapt to her feet before anyone else could move, her papers rattling in her trembling hands. "Your Honor," she began, her voice too loud, too desperate. "These people don't understand what they're doing. They think they want freedom, but freedom without rules is chaos. I kept them safe. I gave them order. They will regret this day when everything collapses. You need me. They all need me." Her words cracked at the end, and the crowd erupted in boos. Neighbors shouted back, "You destroyed us. You stole from us. We don't need you anymore." The judge struck his gavel, but even he looked unimpressed by her desperate cries. He turned to the man, who rose slowly, his leather folder still at his side. He stepped into the center of the courtroom, his presence silencing the room without force. His voice was calm, steady, and carried into every corner. "For years, fear ruled this valley. It fined your children for chalk drawings, it tore your gardens apart, it punished your laughter and your peace. But fear has no power where truth stands. Tonight you saw that truth. Tomorrow you will live it. Fear is finished." The neighbors erupted into cheers, clapping, chanting, tears streaming down their faces. The judge raised his gavel once more. "This court will now deliver its ruling." The room fell silent again, every heart pounding, every eye fixed on him. Karen's papers slipped from her hands and scattered across the floor, but she didn't bend to pick them up. She stood frozen, pale and trembling, as the sound of the gavel echoed once more, sealing her fate forever. The gavel struck, and the sound seemed to freeze the air. Every person in the courtroom held their breath, waiting for the words that would decide the future of the valley. The judge's eyes moved slowly from the man standing tall and calm in the center to Karen, who stood trembling, her red jacket slipping off one shoulder, her scattered papers lying forgotten on the floor. At last, the judge spoke, his voice deep and steady. "This court has heard the testimonies of the residents. We have seen the evidence provided, and we have reviewed the false documents submitted by the HOA president. The decision is clear. The man who sits before us is the rightful owner of his property. The HOA has no authority over him, nor over many of the matters it has attempted to control. Furthermore, this court declares that the HOA, under the leadership of Karen, abused its power, committed harassment, and operated outside the law. Effective immediately, the HOA is dissolved. Its rules are void. Its authority is gone. And the actions of its president will be referred to the state for criminal investigation." The room erupted into cheers so loud the very walls shook. Neighbors who had once cowered under Karen's gaze leapt to their feet, clapping, crying, embracing one another. The chant began again, rolling like thunder through the chamber. "No more fear. No more lies. No more fear." The sound spilled out of the windows and doors, carried into the streets where more neighbors and reporters were waiting. For the first time in years, the valley shouted not in anger or fear, but in triumph. Karen staggered back, her mouth opening and closing with no sound. "No, no, this isn't possible," she whispered, her voice breaking. She turned to the neighbors, her arms outstretched, her voice rising into a shriek. "You need me. You've always needed me. Without me, you'll fall apart. You'll regret this." But her words were drowned out by the cheers and chants of the people she once controlled. She looked to the judge, but his face was hard. She turned toward the officers, but they were already stepping forward. One placed a hand on her arm. You'll need to come with us." She tried to pull away, but there was no strength left in her. Her head dropped, her shoulders slumped, and the jacket that had once been her crown now looked like a shroud. The man turned, his calm eyes sweeping across the crowd. He raised his hand slightly, and the chants softened until the room was quiet again. His voice was soft but carried into every corner. "For years, you believed silence was safety. You believed fear was stronger than you. But tonight, you see the truth. Fear has fallen. You are free." His words settled into their hearts like fire, steady and warm. The neighbors erupted again, this time with laughter and joy, their cheers louder than ever. Some wept openly, others hugged. Children clapped their hands and shouted the chant with all their might, "No more fear." Karen was led past them, her eyes darting wildly, searching for even one ally. But none came. The neighbors didn't shrink back. They didn't hide their faces. They stood tall, their eyes hard, their voices strong. For the first time, Karen was truly alone. Outside, the courthouse steps became a festival. Lanterns glowed even in the daylight, lifted high into the sky as symbols of freedom. Families sang, neighbors shared food, children ran across the grass, and reporters captured every moment. The chant rolled through the streets, across the hills, and over the lake, "No more fear. No more lies." It echoed like thunder, unstoppable. The man stepped out into the sunlight with his wife and children at his side. The crowd surrounded him, cheering, clapping, thanking him. He did not boast or raise his voice. He only looked at the lanterns glowing in the bright sky, his calm eyes steady, and spoke once more. "Truth does not need to shout. It stands. And it will stand long after fear is gone." The crowd roared, their cheers shaking the valley. Karen's car sped away in the distance, but no one cared. Her shadow was gone, and it would never return. The valley belonged to its people again. That night the valley glowed like it had never glowed before. Every porch had a lantern, every path was lit with soft flames. And the lake shimmered under the weight of hundreds of floating lights drifting slowly across the surface. The people gathered not in silence, not in whispers, but in laughter and celebration. Families carried food to each other's porches, children ran freely without being dragged inside, and music played from open windows where once there had only been fear. For the first time in years, there was no talk of fines, no threats of violations, no heavy shadow hanging over their homes. For the first time, the valley was free. The man sat on his porch with his wife and children. His wife leaned against him, her voice soft but filled with awe. "It feels like a dream," she whispered. "I almost forgot what it sounded like when people laughed without fear." He nodded, his calm eyes reflecting the lanterns glowing on the water. "This is only the beginning," he said. "Fear is gone, but truth must be guarded. They will remember this night, and they will never bow again." His children curled against him, safe and at peace, their small faces glowing with the light of freedom they would grow up knowing. Across the valley, Karen sat in the dark of her empty house. Her red jacket hung uselessly over the back of a chair, her papers scattered across the floor like ashes from a fire. She stared at the curtains, but the glow of the lanterns still slipped through, mocking her. The chants from earlier echoed in her ears. "No more fear, no more lies." She whispered to herself, "They'll regret this. They'll need me again." But the words sounded weak even to her own ears, hollow and powerless. For the first time, she felt what she had made others feel for years. Alone, unwanted, and forgotten. Back at the lake, the neighbors began to lower their lanterns into the water, one by one. They floated gently, their flames glowing like stars against the dark surface, drifting together until the whole lake looked like a river of light. The people clasped hands, their voices joining into a chant that rolled across the hills and echoed through the valley. "No more fear. No more lies. No more fear." Their voices rose higher and higher, filled not with anger but with triumph, with relief, with a new strength that could never be taken away. The man rose and walked to the edge of the lake. He looked out at the glowing water, then turned to the crowd. His voice was soft, but it carried easily into the night. She thought fear was stronger than truth. But fear dies. Truth does not. Tonight you proved it. This valley belongs to you, not to one voice, not to one rule, but to all of you together. His words settled deep into their hearts, and cheers erupted once more, the sound like thunder shaking the hills. Families hugged, children danced, and neighbors lifted their lanterns high into the sky, letting them float upward until the stars themselves seemed to answer. When the music finally quieted and the children drifted to sleep, the neighbors returned to their homes with lighter steps. There were no worried glances, no locked doors, no hushed whispers about fines or threats. There was only peace. The man returned to his porch, his wife's head resting gently on his shoulder, his children asleep inside. He looked out at the last of the lanterns glowing faintly on the lake and whispered, "It is finished." His wife squeezed his hand and smiled softly. "No," she said, "it has just begun." As dawn broke, the valley awoke not with fear, but with laughter. Doors opened wide, neighbors greeted one another cheerfully, and children played loudly in the streets, their voices rising into the morning air without worry. The red jacket that had once symbolized control remained locked away in Karen's house, forgotten. The leather folder, filled with truth, was placed carefully inside the man's home, no longer needed to fight but preserved as a reminder. The sun rose high, and the light touched every home, every family, every heart in the valley. And in that light, the people knew the truth. Fear was gone, and it would never return.